Welcome to this presentation of this keynote on short stories or short narratives, as opposed to extended narratives, which are novels. Note, you should take notes in your book of the important information. The learning intention for this lesson today is to identify the narrative elements of plot, character, conflict, theme, and setting within a short narrative which is a fiction. Also, this presentation will give you an overview of what you must consider in your short story. Welcome to this presentation of this keynote on short story or short narratives. This is opposed to extended narratives, which are novels. Note, you should take notes in your book of important information while you're watching this keynote. The learning intention for the lesson today is to identify the narrative elements of plot, character, conflict, theme, and setting within short narrative fiction. Also, this presentation will give you an overview of what you must consider in your short story. Now, go to this link and watch the introduction video. This is a reminder of the elements of narrative, and you can take notes. So just pause and go to that link now.
Check it out, y'all. Yeah. Setting, that's like where it's going down. Could be the train compartment, a castle, or a town. Could be the Arctic winter light to build a fire. The temperature's dropping, excitement's getting higher. Setting sets the scene, so the scene seems set. Could be an Italian restaurant where we met. Setting gives us the where and the when. Could be modern day, the future, or way back when. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. It's the action, the question, satisfaction. What's going down? What's going to happen? 4 men at sea in an open boat, rowing and hoping that they can stay afloat. The plot, they had to make it to the beach, but the waves are big and the shore seems out of reach. Plot is a series of events like Lemony Snicket. It could be crazy, wild, or straight wicked. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Knock, knock. Oh, it's the characters, the people in the story who carry out the action. Characters can be pretty tiny and clean. Characters can be silly, whiny, or mean. Juliet is a character and so is Romeo. Pokemon has characters and so does Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters can be dogs, lions, or hippos. J.K. Rowling chose Harry Potter. Who knows? Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Snack back in your backpack, we're not finished. Something's going wrong. That's the conflict, kids. A struggle in the plot. Now who's on top? Could be a fight for money like some robbers and cops. Could be an internal conflict, a struggle inside. Like I don't wanna tell the truth, but I don't ever wanna lie. Stick something in your eye, now you're conflicted. What created drama? The conflict did. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. The theme of the story is the main idea, the central belief, or the topic that's in there. It's usually something abstract like sacrifice, isolation, and resurrection. We back to life. Like don't lie, don't practice libel. The theme of to build a fire is survival. Survivor on your own like 5-0. Vocabulary, something that you have to get. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story.
This keynote follows this sequence of this outline. This outline basically has what you must include in your short story. You'll find that where there's the red section, there is actually more information, more in-depth keynotes that I'll create as well. So don't worry about that. So in your short story, you need to demonstrate a short story plot, which may have a twist or a cliffhanger at the end. You will need to create a character using STEO, which means by using a variety of characterization techniques. Without conflict, your story will be boring, and we do not want that. Your story should have a theme or a central idea, and when regarding the setting, you should have one setting and a minimal time frame. Furthermore, you need to consistently use one point of view, and you also need to include some literary devices, which we did with the poetry. You need a variety of sentence structures and excellent language. I suggest you refer back to this slide, as it is almost a checklist for you to consider when you're writing your short story. So I would suggest that you take notes now. Okay, so what is the purpose of a short story narrative, and what is the audience? Well, for a start, a short story is actually a genre in its own right. It can be read in one sitting. It was invented years ago because people did not have time to read a whole novel, yet they wanted to be entertained. So your short story's purpose is to be entertaining. Your audience is some of your peers may read this short story through the editing process, and obviously I am the marker, I am also the audience, and I will be reading your short story as well. With each of the slides, please take notes. Now, this is a model of a short story genre, which is written on this slide. You'll see that there's some repetition here. I've also stated in that first paragraph the same as the previous slide, but you can just write these notes down if you have not got them. So there's additional components that you need to look at, such as symbolism, tension, suspense, mood, atmosphere. You might have an unexpected ending. You need to consider the theme. Obviously, there's character, there's setting, there's conflict, which is also called a problem or a dilemma. There's action, there's a climax where the story builds to the most exciting point, and then there's a resolution after the climax. This is a concise sort of a version of all the points you need to consider in a short story. It's another representation and more terminology that we'll be discussing through the short story. Pause and have a read of this slide. It'll give you some sense of where we're going and the concepts that we'll be discussing. So, plot is often discussed by referring to Freytag's plot pyramid. So when we look at a plot of the story, we're really mapping the excitement of the story. How exciting is it? The start of the story can be called a number of things, such as exposition or orientation. Plot links closely with conflict, problem. Once the character starts to have a problem, the story gains momentum, and this is referred to as the rising action. Once the story hits the climax, or it has the falling action, which can be very quick in a short story, or it may have a twist or a cliffhanger, as I've previously stated. But you'll notice that when you're plotting the excitement of a short story, it will look different to an extended narrative. The extended narrative will have a plot pyramid looking more like this image here, really, whereas when you explore later more about the plots, you will find that there is a different angle of the pyramid, I guess, for a short story. So the final part of a narrative is called a denotement or a resolution. As I said, there'll be more information about this later. So the expectation is that you create characters, minimal characters, 1 or 2 or 3 at the most, by using a variety of 5 main techniques. Again, there is more information coming in another keynote. Pause and read this slide. The main thing that I want you to take away from this is that with your characters, you want to create them by using speaking, their thoughts, their actions, and how they look or their appearance, and how they interact with other characters. You want to use all of those characterization techniques, not just repetitiously kind of just describing what's happening or just doing speech all the way through. That becomes a very boring story. So take note of the different methods and make sure you know what they are. Also, make sure you check how to set out your speech correctly, as this will be used for speech and for thoughts. Okay, so it's very important that you set it out correctly. Conflict. With regards to the conflict in the story, the spillway, basically in the spillway, the conflict type is that it's a person versus themselves. This is the conflict type. Because Spencer has self-doubt and he lacks confidence. With your short story, you'll need to consider this because you won't be able to just choose from any of the conflict types. It has to match in with this story. It may be hard to suddenly introduce a supernatural element or a natural disaster or a person versus technology. The reason for this is your story is set in the past, and it's the spillway is set in the past, and it heavily focused on people and their interactions with others. So what is theme? Obviously you need to pause and take notes all the way through this video. The theme is what the author, you, are trying to convey, in other words, the central idea of the story. The main difference is that a short story has one theme, whereas a novel may have multiple. The setting is a social environment, which means what are the people in the society like. It is also the place or the location, and it also the time, which means the era. Is it in the past, the present, or the future? It's important to remember that you should have minimal settings, like only set in, for example, the spillway is only set at the party. You can obviously change that setting, but you only really want to have one place, and a minimal amount of time goes by. For example, in the spillway, it's just really talking about an hour at the party, and at the most you want to go to a day. So pause and read this slide and take notes. This is just a little bit more information about the setting to consolidate what I was talking about previously. Again, just to add to your notes. Point of view, this is going to have another whole keynote on it because it is reasonably involved. What is the point of view of the spillway is the thing. It is from Spencer's point of view. He is the narrator, and it is from the first person. So you'll have to consider that fairly carefully when you are writing your short story. The main thing is that you have the consistency with your point of view. Okay, you will also need to include some language devices. Most importantly, you just have to have excellent language, which is very thoughtful. After your first draft, I would try and include some language devices if you haven't got any already. And we've done this already, so it's our adjectives or describing words as well. You need to insert perhaps some larger words and improve your vocabulary and insert some imagery. After you've done the first draft, I would add more then. Now here's a few examples to remind you what you can add into your short story. Here's something for you to read as well about voice, about the voice of your character, and we'll be studying this a little bit more closely when we look at the spillway and we hear or read Spencer's voice. And as well, you might consider adding some symbolism to your short story, something that might be a bit of a recurring thing in your story. Now this slide is really important. When you have a variety of short sentences and long sentences in your story becomes more interesting. Short sentences can force the reader to feel some sense of urgency of the situation, or it might make them feel the anger that you want the character to have, or the intensity. Longer sentences tend to slow things down and they are more calming and thoughtful, but if all you have is long sentences, it's a very calming, thoughtful story, but it won't have what you need in particular for a short story. So don't forget to use both short and long sentences. Have a read of some of these for examples. Now, this particular little clip here that I've got is a very simple little video telling you how to set out dialogue. It's quite nice. I would have a watch of that and take some notes. Before actually reading this slide, I would do that. It explains very simply how to set out your dialogue and your speech marks. Remember to vary your dialogue tags, not always saying he said, she said, whispered, shouted, vary them. It will need to be set out exactly without errors, your dialogue, to get full marks for the punctuation. That's the one thing that straight away I will notice. So also take notes on the speech and how it can be used for thoughts as well for the character. It could be the character was thinking, and that could also be in speech marks. So, and the main thing as well is don't overuse dialogue, don't overuse speech. I don't want to go from one speech to the next. Now, we need some good words, good vocab. This is just to remind you to insert that at the draft stage if you haven't already. Also, just take note to vary your conjunctions. Don't always have and. Don't use and in a sentence more than once. Furthermore, don't use the same sentence starters in any word or any word in general. Don't be too repetitive. When editing your final type copy, may I suggest that you use text to speech to help you find the errors, and hopefully we'll get to do some peer assessing as well. Now, this is just a little reminder to use some sensory words, talking about feelings. This is going to be helpful. This last slide just really is a summary of what short stories must include, and again, so is this one. Thank you for listening to this keynote.